The wind cut like broken glass. Naomi Redbird braced herself against the white wall of snow, her shawl snapping in the air like a torn sail. The mountains around her groaned with the weight of winter. Somewhere far behind, the skeletal remains of the mining town of 10 Pines vanished into the whiteout. In front of her, the path was gone, swallowed by the blizzard. She held the bundle of wood tighter, the coarse bark biting into her frost-numbed arms. Each step upward toward the ridge felt like climbing into the mouth of some ancient frozen beast. "Just 10 more minutes," she whispered to herself, but the wind snatched the words before they left her lips. She wasn't doing this for thanks. No one up there would say much. The old man barely spoke. His wife only nodded. But they were alive barely, and that mattered. That was enough. Naomi's boots cracked through the ice crust, sinking into snow that came to her knees. She gritted her teeth and leaned forward, forcing her body uphill. Her breath formed jagged clouds, and her hands had long stopped feeling like hands. Still, she pressed on, because no one else would. At the top of the ridge, an old cabin leaned against the wind, like a man who had given up standing straight. The chimney was dead, no smoke, no sign of fire inside. Naomi staggered forward, knocking the snow from her boots at the porch. She rapped on the door with her knuckles, 3 soft taps, same as always. Silence. Then the creak of a chair. A weak voice. "Naomi?" Carolyn Ward opened the door with trembling fingers. Her face was sallow and her lips nearly blue. Behind her, the fireplace was nothing but cold ash. Naomi's heart clenched. "No more wood?" she asked gently. "Thomas fell trying to get some. We couldn't lift him. He's in bed." Naomi nodded once and brushed past her boots, thudding against the wooden floor. She moved fast, firewood into the hearth. Strips of newspaper flint spark. The room filled with smoke, then heat. Caroline wept quietly as Naomi ladled soup from a tin flask into 2 chipped bowls. Thomas lay under quilts in the back room, groaning in pain. She brought the bowl to him, and he touched her hand with fingers like ice. "You came," he murmured. "I always will." She didn't cry. She never did. Not for herself, not for them. Not anymore. Naomi stayed long enough to see color return to their faces and the fire catch strong. Then she stood, brushed the snow from her shoulders, and turned to go. That's when she felt it. Not saw. Felt. The hairs on her neck rose like pine needles in frost. She stepped off the porch and looked up toward the tree line. Just beyond the cabin, the forest twisted into shadows. There, at the edge, stood a figure, a tall man. Still as a statue, wrapped in a heavy coat, wide-brim hat low over his brow. Even from this distance, Naomi could feel the weight of his gaze. It wasn't fear she felt, it was something older, something feral. He didn't move, neither did she. Then, as if the mountain blinked, he vanished into the trees. Back at her shack, Naomi sat beside her stove, rubbing warmth into her knees. Her fingers, raw and cracked, trembled as she poured tea. She didn't drink it, just watched the steam rise like ghosts. That man. She had never seen him before, but the way he stood, silent, tall, carved from the cold, she knew. That was the son, the one the old couple never spoke of, the one who left and never came back, the one who lived somewhere high up the ridge in a stone house built for no one but ghosts. The next morning, Naomi didn't go up the trail alone. She heard the crunch of snow behind her, turned, and there he was, not the man, but the boy, Jonas Little Elk, maybe 10 years old, skin brown as river rock, black braids falling from under his cap. She'd seen him once or twice wandering the lower woods. Rumor was he had no home, parents gone, lived where he could, never begged, never cried, just watched. "You're following me," she said flatly. "I saw you yesterday," he answered unbothered. "You shouldn't be in this snow." "You are. I'm not a child." "I'm not either." Naomi studied him for a moment. He carried a bundle of kindling. His boots were too big, patched with string, and his gloves were mismatched, one wool, one leather. But his eyes were sharp, fierce. He had the look of someone who had already survived too much. "Come on then," she said, finally turning. "But keep up, and no questions." He followed without a word. The climb was worse today, the snow deeper. Naomi's legs burned and her lungs ached. Jonas didn't complain. When she stopped to catch her breath, he handed her a dried apple slice from his coat. At the cabin, Caroline cried when she saw the boy. A child, she gasped. "He helped carry wood," Naomi said simply. Jonas said nothing, but his eyes darted around the room like he was memorizing it. Safety, warmth, the sound of a fire, not just for someone else. Thomas offered him his chair. Jonas shook his head, stood near the door, still watching. Naomi served the soup and bread in silence. And then it happened again. That feeling, the cold that isn't from the weather, the shadow that watches without breath. Jonas moved first. He went to the window. "There's a man," he said. Naomi followed his gaze. Same figure, same hat, standing just beyond the tree line. But this time, closer. Later, as Naomi and Jonas descended the trail, she finally spoke. "Some people survive the cold," she said half to herself. "Others carry the fire." Jonas glanced at her. "Which one are you?" She didn't answer, but her hands, blistered and bleeding beneath her gloves, still held tight to the empty soup pot and the last bundle of kindling. The next morning, Naomi Redbird rose before the light touched the peaks. The snow had hardened overnight, forming a crust of ice that cracked beneath her boots as she walked. The wind had calmed, but the silence that replaced it felt heavier somehow, like the world was holding its breath. Jonas didn't show up that morning, and she didn't wait for him. She figured the boy had enough sense to stay warm, though part of her hoped he was already up the trail, waiting behind a pine with those quiet, watchful eyes. The woods were still. No birds, no tracks. Just her breath and the sound of her footsteps grinding through the ice. As she rounded the bend that curved past the rock ridge above the Ward cabin, she slowed. That was where she'd seen the figure twice now, tall, still always watching. She reached the cabin without seeing him. The chimney was already smoking. That was new. Inside, the fire was steady. Caroline was up and humming, spooning broth into a pan. Thomas still looked weak, but had color in his cheeks. Naomi smiled faintly. "Good morning," she said, placing her satchel on the table. "Looks like someone got the fire going early today." Caroline nodded but said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the window, then to Naomi. There was something unreadable there, gratitude maybe, or something closer to dread. "I didn't light it," Caroline finally said, voice low. Naomi blinked. "Then who?" Before the question left her lips, the cabin door creaked open behind her. She turned. He stood in the doorway, half shadowed by the light behind him. Same wide-brim hat, same long coat, dusted with snow. A leather strap crossed his chest, rifle slung behind his back. His boots tracked in flakes as he stepped forward without a word. Thomas stirred. Caroline froze. Naomi straightened her spine. "You," she said. His voice was deep and calm. It's a high ridge. I saw the smoke. Thought I'd check in. She didn't believe that for a second. His eyes weren't scanning for danger. They were locked on her. You're Elias, she said, more fact than question. He didn't deny it. Caroline spoke, her voice trembling. He brought wood last night. After you left. Said nothing. Just dropped it and left. Naomi looked at him again, searching for something in the lines of his face, guilt, sorrow, recognition. There was nothing but distance, like his soul still lived miles up that mountain. You live up there all alone, she asked. His reply came after a long pause. I live with silence. She studied him. His face was worn, creased, not by age, but by absence. A man who hadn't spoken enough to keep his voice warm. Everything about him felt abandoned, the way he stood, the way he kept one hand near the rifle, even here. He lives up there, like the wind, Caroline said suddenly. Her voice was soft, tired, sharp, invisible, and colder than bone. Elias didn't react. Maybe he'd heard worse. Naomi stepped closer, chin tilted. Your parents are starving, Elias. I've been climbing that ridge for weeks to keep them alive. You didn't notice? He met her eyes now. I didn't ask for your help. She laughed once. No, you just left them to rot. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I lost my wife, he said finally, his voice more gravel than words. Buried her with my own hands. After that, I stopped believing in anything that stayed. Naomi's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. You think you're the only one who buried someone? He looked down. I didn't come here for a sermon. Then why come at all? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the hearth. His eyes lingered on the flames. Fire's different up here, he said quietly. It doesn't just warm. It reminds you that you're still breathing. Naomi felt something shift in the room then. Not warmth, just the absence of bitterness, if only for a second. He pulled something from his coat, a bundle of thick-cut logs tied with leather string. He dropped them by the fire without a word, then turned toward the door. You planning on staying long? She asked. No, he said, stepping out into the snow, but he paused before closing the door. You don't know what that fire means to them. You think you're helping. You are. But that doesn't mean you understand. The door clicked shut behind him. Naomi stood there a moment, jaw tight. Thomas shifted in his chair. He ain't cruel, he muttered. Just broken in places he never tried fixing. Caroline sat beside him, eyes still on the door. Sometimes the mountain eats people, spits out the shell. That's what happened to our boy. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked the path back down alone. Her bag was empty, her legs aching, her mind full. As she passed the bend near the ridge, she saw them boot prints, fresh, deep, going uphill. She followed them with her eyes as they disappeared into the woods above. The old trail, overgrown, forgotten, led higher than she had ever gone. Toward the house of stone built into the mountain face, no one had dared speak of it for years. Jonas waited near the trail fork. I thought you'd bring bread, he said. Tomorrow. He looked at the sky. You saw him. She nodded. I saw him. Jonas kicked at the snow, silent for a long time. He watches, the boy said. At night. I've seen him near my campfire. Doesn't say anything. Just watches. Naomi didn't doubt it. They walked in silence for a stretch, snow crunching beneath them. Why do you think he came today? Jonas asked. Naomi stared into the trees. Because he wanted to see who was keeping them alive. And now she said, I think he's trying to remember how to be alive himself. They walked the rest of the way without speaking. That night, Naomi sat at her stove, the tea untouched again. Her fire was low but steady. She traced her finger over the rim of a cracked ceramic cup. He wasn't gone. Not entirely. And something about that scared her more than if he had been. The next morning, Naomi didn't pack the usual route. Instead of heading to the ward's cabin first, she took the fork that climbed higher toward the slope she'd always avoided, the one swallowed in evergreens and fog. Jonas trailed behind her, silent as always, but his footsteps told her he wasn't far. She didn't ask him to come. He didn't ask to follow. Above the tree line, the air turned sharper, cleaner, less forgiving. The trail narrowed into a ledge hugging the mountain's ribs. Frozen pines reached out like fingers, their branches brittle and white. By midday, Naomi spotted it, a shape emerging from the rock, like it had grown there. The stone house. Elias's place. It was strange, not crumbling like the shacks below, but solid, built with intent. The stones were stacked with precision. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint but steady. She stood at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding. Jonas stepped beside her. "You sure you want to go in?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going." He stayed back as Naomi approached the door. She didn't knock. She waited. It opened anyway. Elias filled the frame. His coat was off, sleeves rolled. His hands were dark with soot and ash, and he looked different. Not softened, not open, but less ghostly. "Thought you'd come," he said. "I didn't say I would." He stepped aside. Still. Naomi entered slowly. The house was cold in color but warm in temperature. A fire crackled in the hearth. Tools hung neatly on the wall. The place smelled of cedar and boiled coffee. Elias moved to the stove without looking at her. "There's tea." She didn't sit. "This your retreat then, fortress on the hill?" He poured 2 mugs and handed one to her. "Something like that." She held the cup but didn't drink. "I wanted to see where you went, what you chose over them." He didn't flinch. "I didn't choose this. I just kept walking after everything broke." "That's not the same thing." He sat across from her at the table, cradling his cup. "You don't know what I lost." Naomi leaned forward. Her voice was low, hard. "And you don't know what you left behind." Their eyes locked. Elias blinked first. Naomi stood walking to the wall where a photograph hung crooked in a wooden frame, faded, sepia-toned. A woman stood beside Elias, younger, before the pain set in his shoulders. Her smile was full, real. Naomi felt the echo of it like a pulse in the room. "She was beautiful," Naomi said gently. "She was my lungs," he said quietly. "After the mine collapsed, I clawed through stone for 12 hours. Found her hand. That's all. Nothing else, just her hand." The silence that followed pressed against the walls like weather. "I buried her here," Elias added, his voice thinner now. "Under that tree out back, the one with the split trunk." Naomi turned toward the window. She saw it, the lone tree rooted at the ridge's edge, branches curved like reaching arms. "She would have wanted you to stay with them," Naomi said. "She would have," Elias whispered. "But I couldn't. I couldn't breathe in that house. Every step, every sound reminded me she was gone. I knew if I stayed, I'd join her." Naomi let the moment linger before replying. "My husband died in a fire," she said. "Our barn caught one night. Wind dragged the flames to the house. I tried to go in. I did. But the roof fell." Elias looked at her, surprised. "I was pregnant," she continued. lost them both. I laid on that ground 3 days after praying the snow would bury me. It didn't. She finally sat down. That's the difference between us, Elias. We both lost. But I stayed. I kept giving. He looked down at his hands. Naomi studied him. They needed you, and instead they got me. A stranger. Elias's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I watched you, he admitted. At first I thought you were doing it to be seen, to prove something. But that wasn't it. You weren't saving them. You were saving yourself. Naomi blinked. Is that your way of saying thank you? He smirked slightly, the closest thing to a smile he'd made in years. Maybe. They sat in silence for a few breaths, sipping the bitter tea. Outside wind pushed against the stones, but didn't enter. Then Naomi said, They won't last another winter alone. You know that. I know. They don't need a ghost Elias. They need their son. His jaw tightened. It's not that easy. No, it's not, she said. But that's what makes it matter. Later, Naomi stepped outside. Jonas was waiting on the edge of the trees, throwing rocks at a dead stump. You talked to him, he asked. She nodded. Some. Jonas tilted his head. He say anything stupid. Only everything. They walked down together, the trail slick with melting ice. Halfway down, Naomi looked back. Elias was on the porch, watching them. No rifle in hand. No hat shadowing his face. Just him, bare, blinking against the sun. That night, Naomi returned to the Ward's cabin. She laid bread on the table, lit the fire, and sat beside Caroline. He's still up there, she said softly. Caroline's eyes misted. He came back once. Just once. Years ago. Left food. Said nothing. I tried to call his name. He didn't turn. He's listening now, Naomi said. Not ready, but listening. Thomas stirred. Then maybe there's hope yet. Back in her shack, Naomi watched the fire flicker against the tin walls. She thought of Elias's stone house, the tree with the split trunk, the woman in the photo. She didn't pity him. But for the first time, she didn't resent him either. Some people drowned in grief. Others learned to carry it. And some, like Elias, stood on the shore deciding whether to wade back in. The wind that night spoke like a restless ghost, threading through the cracks of the Ward cabin, rattling windows, and whispering memories too old to forget. Naomi sat by the fire, gently stirring a pot of venison stew. The scent of rosemary and bone broth hung in the air. Thomas dozed in the rocking chair, his breathing uneven but peaceful. Caroline sat across from Naomi, her hands clutched tightly in her lap, knuckles white under fragile skin. Neither woman had spoken in several minutes. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, like the calm before something fragile breaks. Naomi looked up. You've been quiet all day. Caroline didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the fire. Then she said, You saw him. Naomi nodded. I did. Caroline's eyes grew wet, but she didn't blink. He looked well as a man can look when he hasn't let go of anything. Caroline gave a brittle smile. That's him. Always held on too tight. Naomi added a piece of bread to the pan, toasting it by the flames. She watched as Carolyn stared into the fire like it held answers she'd spent years trying to forget. Then softly, the old woman whispered, Our son died the day he walked away from this house. Naomi turned from the fire slowly. Caroline didn't look up. I'm not talking about his body, she said. No, that kept walking. It was his heart that died. His laughter. His soul. Thomas stirred but didn't wake. Naomi sat down beside Caroline, her voice low. "You don't have to tell me." "But I want to," Caroline said, and now her hands trembled in her lap. "You should know. Someone should." She exhaled long and thin. "It was 10 winters ago. After the mine collapsed, Elias stayed with us for a while. Just a while. He was ruined. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't speak. Sat by the fire with that blank stare. I tried everything, songs, stories, his favorite tea." She smiled bitterly. "You know what he said to me? He said the fire made too much noise." Naomi stayed quiet. "One morning he went out for a walk. I watched him from the porch. He didn't take his coat, just kept walking straight up the ridge. I called his name. He didn't even turn around. That was the last day I saw him as my son." Caroline's voice cracked, and Naomi gently reached for her hand. The old woman didn't pull away. "He came back once, you know," she said. "Just once. Maybe a year later. Dropped some meat on the porch. Wouldn't come inside. Didn't speak. Just left." Naomi's brow furrowed. "Why?" Caroline swallowed. "Because he couldn't face us. And maybe, just maybe, because we couldn't face him." Thomas stirred again, mumbling in his sleep. Caroline looked over, then back to Naomi. "We were angry too," she admitted. "Not just grieving, angry. At God, at fate, and at him. I said things I can't unsay. I told him she died because he waited too long. I told him it should have been him." Naomi's eyes widened. Caroline nodded, face drawn with guilt. "And he just stood there. Didn't speak. Just took it like he believed it. That's the last time we looked at each other." The fire cracked and popped. Outside, the wind howled like something ancient and tired. Naomi leaned forward. "That's why he won't come back." "Would you?" Caroline said, eyes sharp with sorrow. "If your mother cursed your name on the coldest day of your life," Naomi looked down her throat tight. "No," she said. "I suppose I wouldn't." They sat in silence, the air thick with the weight of broken years. After a while, Caroline wiped her eyes. "You remind me of her, you know, his wife. Mireia. Same stubborn kindness. Same fire in the bones." Naomi offered a soft smile. "I'm just trying to keep people warm." Caroline chuckled once, then winced, touching her side. Naomi stood quickly. "You okay? Just sore bones. Don't worry, dear. I'm older than the ridge." Naomi returned to the fire, stirring the pot again. The warmth, the spices, the rhythm of the ladle, comfort in repetition. She glanced at the old woman. "He still watches." Caroline nodded. "That's his way. Close enough to see, far enough not to feel." Naomi ladled stew into 2 bowls. "I think he's listening now." Caroline didn't reply, but her eyes shimmered hopeful in a way Naomi hadn't seen before. She passed her a bowl, and they ate in silence. Outside, the snow had eased. The sky was clearer, the clouds thinning like old grief. Stars winked faintly between the treetops. The next morning, Naomi packed more than usual extra wood-wrapped loaves and herbs. She stepped outside just as Jonas appeared from behind the oak. He always showed up without sound like smoke. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Up." His eyes widened. Again, Naomi looked him over. "You comin'?" Jonas didn't answer, just started walking. As they climbed, Naomi replayed Caroline's words in her mind. "I told him it should have been him. It explained so much: the silence, the shame, the years Elias spent building walls of stone and distance. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was hiding from the echo of his mother's voice. By mid-morning they reached the fork. Jonas stayed back again, sitting on a boulder, kicking his feet in the snow. "You think he'll talk today?" he asked. Naomi looked toward the ridge. "He might." She climbed the last stretch alone. When she reached the stone house, she didn't knock. She stood still, letting the wind push her hair across her cheeks. The door opened. Elias stood there, coat half-buttoned, eyes rimmed in fatigue. "I didn't expect you so soon," he said. "Grief doesn't wait," Naomi replied. He stepped aside. She entered slowly. This time she brought the bread to the table without hesitation. "You built this place yourself?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Took me 3 summers." Naomi looked around. "Must be solid." "I needed something that wouldn't fall," he said. The words lingered like smoke. Naomi sat. "She told me what she said to you." He didn't speak. "She's sorry," Naomi added. I could see it in her bones. Elias's hands clenched slightly. Too late. Maybe Naomi said, or maybe just barely in time. He stared into the fire, jaw working. "She was wrong, Elias. But you believed her. That's what hurt you most." He looked at her now, really looked. And for the first time, Naomi saw it: not the silence, not the anger. The wound, still open, still raw, but no longer hidden. The wind had settled that morning, not gone just resting. It carried a strange quiet, the kind that came before the snow broke loose from the pines and crashed into the earth below. Naomi Redbird felt it in her chest as she climbed the calm before something loud and cold. She reached the Ward's cabin just past dawn. Smoke was struggling out of the chimney, like it didn't want to rise. Inside, the air was heavy with damp wood and the scent of cough balm. Caroline was sitting in her chair, wrapped in every blanket Naomi had ever brought. Thomas lay in bed, shivering beneath 3 quilts, his breath rattling in his chest, like dry leaves. "You should have called for me sooner," Naomi said, already unbuttoning her coat, setting down her bundle of supplies. "We didn't want to be a burden," Caroline murmured. Naomi didn't answer. Her hands were already moving firewood into the hearth flint to steel sparks flying. She added a twist of dried sage to the kindling. The cabin slowly began to breathe again. She poured warm broth into a tin cup and held it to Caroline's lips. "You're not a burden," she said quietly. "You're the reason I keep climbing." Caroline tried to smile, but it faded as the door burst open with a sharp bang. Snow rushed in first, then Elias. He stood in the threshold, chest heaving, boots dripping, eyes blazing. His gaze landed on Naomi, then swept to the fire, the soup the room filled with heat that hadn't been there the night before. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, laced with something darker than anger. "Who gave you the right to be in this house, no?" Naomi stood slowly, brushing her hands against her skirt. "I came because they were cold. Because no one else did." Elias stepped in, letting the door slam behind him. His coat was soaked, hair matted with snow. The tension in his shoulders filled the room like smoke. "You think you're saving them," he snapped. "You think this little performance makes you better than me?" Naomi didn't flinch. "I think it's a hell of a lot more than what you've done." Elias took another step forward, jaw clenched. "If you cared so damn much, where were you when they froze?" That hit harder than he expected. Naomi stared at him, eyes steady. "I was carrying soup through a blizzard. I was chopping wood with blistered hands. I was doing what their son wouldn't." Thomas groaned in the bed, his eyes fluttering open. Stop it, he muttered weakly. Elias didn't move. Naomi's voice dropped low and firm. You don't get to walk in here and bark orders like your absence wasn't a death sentence. You left them. Elias pointed a finger, trembling. You don't know what I've lived through. No, Naomi said, stepping toward him. But I know what they lived without. His breath caught. Just for a second. You don't know what I lost, he said, quieter now. I lost everything. Mireia was everything. Naomi's voice cracked just slightly. You're not the only one who's buried someone. The room fell into silence. Even the fire seemed to pause. You don't get to weaponize your grief, she added. Not to excuse this. Not to excuse walking away from the two people who would have died waiting for you. Caroline turned her head toward her son, voice paper thin. She's right. Elias looked at her like he'd been punched. I know it, Caroline whispered. You were hurting, but so were we. And I hurt you worse with my words. I see that now. But you didn't come back. Not when we needed you. Elias's hands dropped to his sides, fingers twitching. I was ashamed, he said, barely audible. I thought, if I came back, you'd see me and remember that I didn't save her. That I didn't save anyone. Naomi took a breath, then softened. You didn't have to save anyone, she said. You just had to stay. Elias lowered his head. Thomas coughed, his voice scratchy. You're not a bad man, Elias. But you've been one hell of a coward. Elias flinched. Being strong doesn't mean disappearing, Thomas added. It means standing in the pain with the people who still love you. Caroline reached out with a trembling hand. We never stopped. Elias stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he stepped forward. He sank to his knees at his mother's side. His head bowed, and his voice was just a breath. I'm sorry. Naomi turned away, giving them space. She moved to the stove and poured hot tea for Thomas, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet that was settling. Something had cracked. Not shattered, but cracked. And sometimes that's how the healing begins. Later, Naomi stood outside, staring at the pale sun peeking through the thinning clouds. Her cheeks burned from the confrontation, her breath catching in her throat. Elias joined her silently, arms crossed against the cold. I thought if I came back, he said they'd send me away. They didn't. I thought maybe I didn't deserve it. Naomi glanced at him. Maybe none of us do. But we try anyway. Elias nodded once. You're something else, Naomi Redbird. She smiled, faint and sad. I'm just tired of digging graves. He looked out over the tree line where the wind was no longer howling, just moving like breath in a sleeping chest. I want to help, he said finally. I don't know how to fix what's broken. But I can cut wood. I can cook. I can stay. Naomi looked at him. This time she believed him. You can start tomorrow, she said. The nights are still long. That evening, Naomi made the long walk home alone. She passed Jonas near the edge of the forest. He was balancing on a frozen log, tossing pebbles at the trees. Did he yell? Jonas asked. Naomi gave a small smile, louder than the wind. Jonas shrugged. Did you yell back? Oh, I did. He grinned. Good. They walked the rest of the way in silence. In her shack, Naomi sat beside her fire and thought of Elias on his knees at his mother's side, whispering things that took years to form. He wasn't whole. Not yet. But maybe he wasn't hollow anymore either. The axe struck clean, burying deep into the log with a satisfying crack. Elias grunted, lifted the blade again, and split another. Steam rose from his shoulders as his breath fogged the air. Around him, wood chips flew like sparks. By the end of the hour, the stack of split logs beside him had doubled. He didn't stop. He didn't want to. He needed the rhythm, the burn in his arms, the thudding pain in his palms. Every swing was a word left unsaid. Every crack was a guilt he couldn't name. And still, it wasn't enough. Naomi hadn't come by that morning. She always did. He kept glancing toward the trail, listening for footsteps, a voice, even that boy's shadow. But the woods stayed quiet. Just wind and birdsong and the creak of pine. Inside the cabin, his parents rested by the fire. He'd made breakfast, nothing fancy but warm. Caroline had touched his face and called him by his full name. Elias James, she'd whispered. He hadn't heard that in a decade. It burned, so he chopped more wood. He hadn't asked Naomi to stay after yesterday. She hadn't offered. But she didn't have to. He owed her more than words. By noon, he wrapped the bundle of firewood and hoisted it onto his back. The path down was slick, but he moved quickly, boots crunching through fresh snow as he made his way to her shack. He hesitated outside the door. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Good she was home. He knocked once, then pushed it open. Naomi looked up from the stove, surprised, but not startled. Jonas sat at the small table, carving a piece of wood into something vaguely horse-shaped. Elias stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. Brought some wood. Naomi nodded. Appreciated. He dropped the bundle beside the hearth, dusted his hands off, and waited. She didn't offer him tea. Didn't invite him to sit. "You okay?" he asked, unsure what else to say. "Fine," she replied. Silence stretched. The stew bubbled gently behind her. Jonas glanced up, then back to his carving. "I came to help," Elias added. Naomi turned slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "Help who?" He blinked. "You. Them. You said I should show up, so I did." She stepped closer, arms crossed. "I told you to stay. You showed up once. That's not the same." Elias frowned. "I've been cutting wood all morning, and I've been bandaging their feet, grinding herbs for Carolyn's lungs, sewing patches into their blankets. You think help is measured in logs? I'm trying." She sighed, weary in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I know. But trying isn't the same as showing up for the long haul." He swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper, but the words struck like thunder. She gave without asking. "You didn't even stay." Jonas stopped carving. Elias froze. Naomi didn't raise her voice, but her eyes were flint. She gave Elias. "Mireia. She gave everything to you, even at the end. She didn't ask you to save her. She just needed you to be there." He opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked older now, less carved from stone, more like something that had been left in the rain too long. "I couldn't stay," he finally said. "Not then." Naomi softened just a fraction. "But you can now. And not just for them." He looked at her. "For who then?" "For yourself," she said. "Because if you don't, you'll keep trying to fix everything with your hands, but your heart will stay broken." They stood in silence again. This time Jonas filled it. "She makes bread every morning," the boy said, not looking up. "Even when it hurts her hands. Doesn't sell it. Just gives it away." Elias turned to him. Why, Jonas shrugged. Says she remembers what it's like to be hungry. Says giving helps her remember she's still alive. Naomi looked at the boy with something close to affection. You remember more than you should. Jonas grinned. I listen better than I talk. Elias let out a slow breath. Can I help tomorrow? Naomi didn't answer right away. Then be at their cabin at dawn. He nodded and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Naomi spoke again. Elias. He paused. You want to help, she said. Start by listening. He didn't speak, just nodded again and left. The next morning, Elias was at the Ward's cabin before sunrise. He lit the fire before they stirred. He brought broth warm and spiced, just like Carolyn liked it. He listened to Thomas grumble about his aching back and helped him to the chamber pot without complaint. He sat beside his father after breakfast, neither of them talking. The silence was different now. Later that day, he watched Naomi from a distance. She knelt in the snow, tying a string of herbs above the doorframe of a widow's cottage down in 10 Pines. The woman didn't ask for it. Naomi left it anyway. She didn't see him. But he watched. Watched how she gave with no promise of return. Watched how she stitched broken things, not with thread, but presence. Constant, unwavering. He returned to his cabin that night and didn't sleep. He sat beside the fire and stared into it for hours. He was beginning to understand something. Mireya had stayed because she loved him. Naomi stayed because she believed others deserved warmth even when she didn't believe she did. Maybe love wasn't loud. Maybe it was staying through the silence. At dawn, Elias went back down to the Wards. Naomi was already there pulling snow off the roof with a rake. He took it from her without a word and climbed up to finish. She watched him for a moment, then went inside. That night, Jonas showed up at Naomi's door. Something's wrong, he said. Elias went out on his horse. Naomi stiffened. Where? Didn't say. But the wind's turning. You feel it, she did. It had the bite of a storm that wanted to hurt. Without a word, she grabbed her coat and lantern and headed for the ridge. The snow started falling just after dusk, slow at first, like ashes drifting down from a dying sky. Elias stood on the porch of his stone cabin coat pulled tight, watching the clouds swell over the ridge. The air had gone still unnaturally, so like the mountain itself was holding back a breath. A storm was coming, not a gentle one. This would be the kind that ripped trees from the ground and swallowed trails whole. He turned, grabbing his saddle from the hook. His hands moved fast, familiar with urgency. He didn't know why he was moving, only that something pulled at him deep and sudden, like a knot twisting behind his ribs. Halfway through lashing the saddle to the horse, Jonas appeared at the edge of the trees, panting, his cheeks red with cold. She didn't come back, the boy said. Elias dropped the rope. Naomi, he asked. Jonas nodded. Said she was just going to check on Mrs. Lantry before the snow hit. That was hours ago. Her lantern's not back, and her stove's out cold. Elias didn't wait for more. He mounted the horse in one motion, heels pressing firm. The animal bucked, sensing the storm. Where's Lantry's? Elias asked. Jonas pointed southeast, 2 miles past the creek bend. But if she tried to take the long loop... She's in it, Elias muttered, already turning the horse. The sky cracked. The first gust hit hard, slapping the trees sideways. Snow poured in sheets, thick and blinding. Elias leaned into it, reins tight, the horse pushing forward 1 step at a time. He had no clear plan, no mapped route, just the gut-deep certainty that if he didn't move fast, she wouldn't survive the night. And for the first time since Mireya's death, he was afraid. Not of pain, not of the cold, but of losing someone again and not being able to stop it. The trail disappeared under his horse's hooves. The wind howled, drowning the sound of the creek nearby. Ice bit at his skin. Snow clogged his lashes. He shouted her name once, twice. No answer. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow became a fear he couldn't name. Time blurred into movement forward, always forward, and then a shape. Near the edge of the frozen creek, something slumped at the base of a tree. He yanked the reins. The horse reared, nearly throwing him, but Elias slid off and stumbled forward through knee-deep snow. It was her, Naomi. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped tight around a bundle of firewood. Her hair clung to her face, frozen in strands. Her lips were blue, breath shallow. Naomi Elias dropped to his knees beside her, tearing off his coat and wrapping it around her body. Her eyes flickered. Her voice was nothing but a thread. I didn't want the fire to go out. Don't talk, he whispered. Don't say a damn thing. He hoisted her into his arms. She was light, too light. Her body shivered, but it was the last kind of shiver, the kind that came before stillness. I don't know why I'm running, he murmured, cradling her tight, but I know I can't let her die. He mounted fast, balancing her against his chest. The horse reared again, but took off, hooves pounding against the snow as wind screamed around them. Every second stretched. Every breath was a fight. Naomi sagged against him, fading. No, Elias muttered. No, you don't get to leave too. The ridge came into view, his cabin glowing dim through the white. He kicked the horse harder. Inside, the fire was barely alive. He laid her down beside it, stripping off wet clothes, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He boiled water, added herbs from the back shelf, and pressed the steam to her face. Her breathing rasped, then caught. Her fingers twitched. Elias gripped her hand like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Stay, he whispered. He didn't sleep, not that night. He sat beside her, feeding the fire. Eyes locked on the curve of her chest, rising and falling under the quilts. The storm howled outside, trying to get in, but inside the cabin burned with more than wood. By morning, the worst had passed. Naomi stirred, eyes cracking open. Elias leaned in, face lined with exhaustion. You came, she said, barely audible. I'd go through hell twice if it meant I didn't lose you. She smiled weakly. Overdramatic, true though. They sat like that for a long while. I'm not her, Naomi said suddenly, her voice small. I know, Elias replied. I'm not trying to replace her. I don't want you to. She looked up, eyes raw. Then what do you want? He hesitated. Then just stay. Be the fire when mine burns low. Naomi turned her face back to the warmth of the hearth. I can do that. Outside, the world was still white, still broken. But in the stone cabin on the ridge, something had shifted. Not mended, but shifting. The mountain was silent, under a thick coat of snow, like it too was holding its breath. Inside the stone cabin, the fire cracked and hissed. Naomi lay beneath layers of quilts, her face pale but no longer ghostly. Her lips were flushed again. Her hands, once too cold to feel, now twitched when the warmth reached her bones. Elias sat close by, stoking the fire, watching the rise and fall of her chest, like it was the only thing tethering the world together. He hadn't left her side in over a day. He'd changed the dressings on her frost-bitten fingers, fed her broth spoon by spoon, and whispered words into the shadows, words he never imagined himself saying again. Not since Maria. Now Naomi's eyes fluttered open. She looked around slowly, lips dry, then met his gaze. Her voice was raspy. "You didn't let me die." "No," he said simply. She let her eyes fall closed again. "You didn't have to." "I know." Silence settled again, but not the kind that ached. This one was soft, full of things they didn't need to say not yet. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky had cracked open that morning, revealing a pale blue above the pines. Light glinted off the snow like diamonds scattered across the ridge. The world had survived the night. So had they. Naomi stirred a few hours later, her voice steadier. "You should go check on your parents." Elias looked toward the door, reluctant. "I'll still be here when you get back," she added. He nodded. He hadn't realized until that moment how afraid he'd been that if he turned away, she'd vanish like a ghost. But he stood pulled on his coat and left. The path to his parents' cabin was rough with new drifts. It took longer than usual, and his legs burned from lack of sleep. When he arrived, he found Jonas shoveling snow from the porch, nose-red hands moving fast. "About time," the boy muttered. Inside, Caroline looked up with a mix of worry and surprise. "Where's Naomi?" she asked quickly. "Safe," Elias replied. "She got caught in the storm. I brought her up to the cabin." Caroline clutched her chest. "Is she all right?" "She will be." Thomas stirred from his chair by the hearth. "You going back?" Elias nodded. "I'll go with you," Caroline said, pushing up to her feet. Elias hesitated. "The walks, she's family now," Caroline said firmly. "And if she's up there, I'm going." They bundled up. Jonas offered to stay with Thomas, and for the first time Elias saw the old man smile at the boy. "Don't burn the place down," Thomas said gruffly. They left before the light started to fade. The climb was slow. Caroline leaned on Elias's arm most of the way, and when they finally reached the cabin, the firelight from the window spilled out like welcome. Naomi was awake, propped on her elbows. When she saw Caroline, her eyes welled. "You didn't have to climb up here." Caroline huffed, breathless. Said the woman who nearly froze trying to deliver soup. They both smiled the kind of smile that only people who've suffered understand. Elias stepped aside while Caroline took Naomi's hand. They didn't speak much, just sat near each other, fingers intertwined. Elias went outside to gather more wood. As he stacked the logs, his chest felt heavy, not with regret this time, but something else. Hope, maybe. He returned inside to find Caroline dozing by the fire and Naomi watching the flames. He sat next to her quietly. "You said something," she murmured when I was half gone. Elias looked at her. "I said a lot of things." "You said stay." He nodded. "I am," she said. Something in his chest unraveled. Why he asked. After all this, Naomi leaned her head back, staring at the beams overhead. "Because you didn't leave. Because you listened. And because forgiveness burns slower than fire, but it warms longer." Elias closed his eyes. He didn't deserve those words, but he held on to them anyway. The next morning, Carolyn insisted on walking back down to the Ward cabin. Naomi wasn't strong enough to come with her, so Elias stayed. He made tea, sat with Naomi through the quiet, and when she fell asleep again, he watched her breathe like he had before. Later, as the sun began to rise higher over the ridge, Elias did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter. It was short, just a few words on a scrap of brown paper. Then he gave it to Jonas, who'd come up the path with supplies. "Give it to Mabel Shaw," Elias said. The boy read the first line and grinned. "You think she'll believe it?" "She might." Jonas nodded and took off down the trail. Inside, Naomi stirred again. Was that the boy? Yeah, Elias said. Took a letter to Mabel. Naomi arched an eyebrow. You writing now? Elias smirked. Miracles happen. What did it say? He leaned back in the chair beside the fire. Just one sentence, tell the town I'm not gone. Naomi smiled, eyes closing again. You weren't ever gone, just hiding. Elias watched the flames rise, and for the first time he believed it too. The snow outside had begun to melt little by little. Droplets ticked down the stone roof like a soft metronome. It wasn't warm yet, not really, but the bitter edge of winter had dulled. The mountain had loosened its grip. Inside Elias's cabin, Naomi stirred a pot of stew slower than usual, but on her feet at last. Her cheeks had color again. Her hands still ached when she moved them, but the strength was returning. Elias sat near the fire, sharpening a blade he hadn't touched in years. He wasn't watching her, but he was listening. Naomi broke the silence. This place smells better when it doesn't smell like just men and firewood. He chuckled. Can't argue with that. She turned, leaning against the counter. I was thinking once I'm stronger, I'll head back to my shack. Elias's hand froze over the whetstone. You sure you're ready? She met his eyes. I didn't say I'd stay there. He nodded slowly, then went back to his blade. She stepped closer. You ever gonna ask what happened to me before I got here? Elias set the knife down quiet. Only if you want to tell it. Naomi looked down at her hands. It's not a pretty story. Neither's mine. She sat across from him, folding her legs underneath the thick quilt she'd dragged to the chair. The stew continued to simmer behind her, forgotten for now. My husband's name was Simon. Married young. Too young. He thought land could fix what hunger broke, but it never did. He was good with his hands, but not with his temper. Elias said nothing. Naomi's voice stayed steady, but her jaw was tight. First year he raised his voice. Second year he raised his hand. Third year, I stopped counting. Elias leaned forward, his fingers laced together. One night, she continued, he hit me hard enough to crack a rib. That same night, he fell into the river after too much drink. Folks said it was an accident. I didn't argue. She looked up, daring Elias to flinch. He didn't. Instead, he whispered, I'm sorry. I'm not, Naomi said, then softened. I'm not glad he died. But I'm not sorry I survived. They sat in silence, not out of awkwardness, but out of understanding. After a while, Elias spoke. Mireya didn't die in the mine like most folks think. Naomi didn't move. She was sick. Months before the collapse. We didn't know it at first, thought it was exhaustion. But the coughing got worse. Blood in her handkerchief. I begged her to stop working, but she wouldn't. Why not? Naomi asked quietly. She said the mine paid enough to feed our winter, and that was worth the risk. Naomi reached across the table and laid her hand over his. She was braver than most men. Elias looked down. She knew she was dying. She didn't say it, but I saw it. In her eyes. The day before the cave-in, she gave me her wedding ring and told me to keep it in my coat. He pulled it out now, a thin gold band wrapped in worn cloth. He hadn't looked at it in years. Naomi's breath caught. You still carry it? Elias nodded. But I haven't worn it since I buried her. They held that moment together, the past sitting heavy between them. But not painful like before. This time it felt like truth being shared, not sorrow being relived. After a moment, Naomi said, You stayed. That means more than any apology ever could. Elias looked up, startled by her words. You showed up when it mattered, she added. Not just for your parents. For me. He swallowed hard. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. Like I was part of something. You are, Naomi said. We're still broken, you and I. But we're not alone anymore. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. That evening they walked outside together. The air was still cold, but bearable. A few birds had returned, chirping uncertainly from the trees. The snow crunched under their boots, but the trail was clearer now. Elias pointed across the ridge. That line of trees there. That's where Maria wanted to build a garden. Naomi smiled. You should. She'd like that, he said. Naomi nudged his shoulder. I'll help. Come spring. They stood there for a long time, watching the light fade behind the hills. The sky was a soft, bruised purple, the kind of sky that made things feel possible again. Elias spoke, voice low. Naomi, I don't know where this is going. I don't want to rush it, or name it, or ruin it. But I know this much. I don't want to go back to a life without you in it. Naomi turned toward him, tears at the edge of her eyes. I've lived too long thinking I didn't deserve something good, she whispered. But maybe we both do. He took her hand again. This time their fingers laced naturally. The next morning they hiked down to the Ward cabin together. Caroline opened the door and immediately saw the way Elias hovered near Naomi, how his hand touched her back lightly when she coughed, how Naomi looked toward him before stepping inside. Caroline said nothing, just smiled and set another place at the table. Thomas raised an eyebrow, but didn't complain when Elias offered to fetch water. Even Jonas, perched on the porch railing, smirked and said, Took you both long enough? Naomi laughed and Elias couldn't stop smiling. They ate together, warm and full. After the meal, Naomi stepped outside alone. The wind had shifted again, gentle and soft. From up the trail, she saw the smoke of her own shack rising in the distance, her old life. It would still be there, but her home was shifting. It was no longer where she slept. It was where she stayed. The sun had climbed higher than usual for late winter, burning away patches of snow from the dirt path that led to 10 Pines. Elias stood at the edge of the trail, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the road winding down into town. It had been nearly 3 years since he'd walked it with purpose. 3 years of silence. 3 years of shadows. Now, with Naomi's hand brushing lightly against his sleeve, he took the first step down. They walked in silence, but not unease. The air between them had thickened with understanding over the past week, each of them pouring old stories into the quiet and letting the other carry a piece. But today they were heading into town, not to remember, but to be remembered. I don't know who's going to look me in the eye, Elias muttered. Naomi replied softly. Some debts are paid in silence. Others need to be spoken out loud. He nodded, jaw tight. The storefronts appeared slowly through the trees, Weatherby's General Shaw's stables, the faded cross over the old church door. Children played near the well. A cart rattled by its driver, glancing, then doing a double-take. And just like that, the whispers began. They were faint but sharp. That hymn thought he was gone for good. Back from the dead, that one. Elias walked a little slower, but Naomi matched his pace. She didn't speak, just walked beside him, like a wall no gossip could climb. The first person to approach was Mabel Shaw. She stepped out of her stable with hay on her coat and a knowing glint in her eye. Her hands were on her hips. You're late, Ward. Elias raised an eyebrow. For what? For the rest of your life, she said. Now get in here. I need someone to fix the loft gate before it falls and kills my best horse." He blinked, stunned. Naomi grinned. "Guess silence isn't the only payment Mabel wants." He followed her inside without a word. By noon, Elias had fixed the gate, reset 2 loose planks in the stall, and patched a leak over the hay storage. Mabel handed him a tin of jerky and clapped him on the shoulder. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "But you did. That counts." As they left the stable, Reverend Stone was waiting on the chapel steps. His hands were folded. His coat hung too big on his skinny frame. "You left me a congregation full of questions, Elias." Elias hesitated. "I didn't have answers then." "You got 'em now," Elias admitted. "But I've got the truth." Reverend Stone nodded. "Come by Wednesday. The prayer list is long and heavy. Might help to hear a new voice." "I ain't much for preaching," Elias said. Goodstone replied, "We've had too much of that already." They shook hands. It was firm. Final. Down the street, the blacksmith Jed Harmon stepped out of his forge, arms, crossed apron, smoking from the heat. "You got a lot of nerve showing your face." Naomi tensed. Elias took a deep breath. "I know. You think swinging a few axes makes up for running out on your folks?" "No," Elias said. "Nothing makes up for it. But I'm here now. I'll swing axes, stack wood, mend fences. Whatever it takes. I'm not running anymore." Jed stared long and hard. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spat on the ground and said, "Good. My barn door needs rehanging. Be there Thursday." Naomi turned to Elias after Jed walked off. That was almost affectionate. He laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. It came out rusty, but real. They made their way to the general store where Martha Weatherby gave Naomi a tight hug and handed her a bundle of tea leaves. "For your hands," she said. "The storm reached us here. Folks worried about you." Naomi looked to Elias. "Not just me." Martha nodded toward him. "Plenty still mad at you, but they'll get over it. Folks around here forgive quiet men faster than loud ones." Why, Elias asked. Because quiet men listen. Later that afternoon, Naomi and Elias sat on the ridge overlooking town. The trail back to the cabin stretched behind them. Below, the smoke of chimneys rose steady and gray. "They didn't throw rocks," Elias muttered. Naomi smiled. "Nope, just chores." He took a deep breath, watching the wind roll over the treetops. "I forgot what it felt like to belong somewhere." She shifted closer. "You never stopped belonging. You just stopped believing it." They watched the sky in silence for a long while. Then Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old ring Mireya's. He stared at it in his palm, then offered it to Naomi. Her brows lifted. "I don't expect anything," he said. "And I'm not asking for promises. I just want you to have this, because it means something survived. Not just me." Naomi took it gently, cradling it like a fragile ember. "I'll keep it safe. I know you will." She didn't wear it. Not yet. But she held on to it. That evening, they returned to the Ward cabin together. Carolyn met them at the door, smiling wider than Elias had seen in years. Thomas gave Elias a subtle nod. Even Jonas didn't make a snide comment, just handed Elias a bowl of stew and said, "Eat it before it's cold." That night, Elias sat on the porch, a lone lantern flickering beside him. Naomi stepped out a few minutes later, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. She sat beside him. "You were brave today," she said. "I was scared." "You showed up anyway." He turned toward her, voice low. Is that what love looks like? Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. Maybe it's what the start of love looks like. And neither of them moved, even as the cold crept around their boots and the night deepened. The earth cracked beneath the spade with a quiet kind of protest, stiff from the last of the winter frost, but ready to give way. Elias bent low, his hands rough from weeks of work breaking the ground, where Maria once dreamed of planting tomatoes and wildflowers. Beside him, Naomi knelt with a basket of seed potatoes, her scarf pulled tight around her neck, her breath blooming in the chilly spring air. They'd spent the past 3 days clearing brush, laying stones to mark rows, and hauling water from the creek. The garden was a new thing and an old thing, all at once, something born from memory, but meant for the future. Naomi glanced at Elias, her fingers brushing his, as she passed him a sprouting tuber. You really believe anything'll grow up here? She asked. He looked at the sky, the gray clouds thinning. Hope so, she smirked. Hope's stubborn. He stabbed the spade into the dirt again. So are we. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of digging and planting, like a kind of prayer. Each turn of soil was a step forward, each seed a small vow. As they finished the last row, Naomi stood and wiped her hands on her skirt. You hear what folks been saying down in 10 Pines? Elias straightened slowly. Depends which folks. Harvey Colton. Elias's jaw tightened. What about him? Naomi crossed her arms. He told Mabel you left town not because of grief, but because you owed him money. Said Maria took the blame so you wouldn't lose the land. Elias stared at the ground. That's not true. Naomi didn't move. I know that. But people listened to him. He rubbed the back of his neck. He's always hated my father. Carried that grudge right into my name. Why didn't you tell folks the truth? I figured it wouldn't matter. Thought silence was cleaner than begging for understanding. She studied him. It's not cleaner, just heavier. He sighed and sat on the overturned crate they'd dragged out for resting. When Maria got sick, we stopped paying off the loan. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Colton a reason to lean hard. Maria knew if we defaulted, he'd take the ridge. Naomi sat beside him close, so she took more shifts in the mine. He nodded. I should have stopped her. I should have told people what was happening. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, The land remembers what we try to forget. Elias looked at her, brow furrowed. Every patch of soil you work, every stone you to move, it knows what came before. You can't bury the past in the ground and expect it not to grow back. So what do? You face it. You speak it. Before someone else does in your place. They returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, hands sore, bodies tired but full. Naomi cooked while Elias sat with his father oiling the old rifle that hadn't been fired since the war. Thomas spoke without looking up. Heard about Colton flapping his gums again. Elias grunted. He's always been loud. You planning to let him keep talking? Elias set the rifle down. What would you do? Thomas finally looked at him. I'd look that man in the eye and remind him why folks used to follow the name Ward. Caroline chimed in from the rocker near the hearth. But I'd bring bread. Folks listen better when they've eaten. Elias shook his head, chuckling. You two are dangerous. That evening, Naomi packed a basket with bread and a jar of pickled onions, handed it to Elias, and said, Time to speak your version. He took it without argument. The walk to town was darker this time. Clouds had returned heavy and low. By the time he reached 10 Pines, the lanterns had been lit in the windows and smoke curled up into the wind. He found Colton in the saloon, as expected, seated near the stove, surrounded by men with more drinks than sense. Elias stepped in head high and silence rippled like a stone tossed in water. Colton smirked. Well, well, look what the wind blew back. Elias walked up and set the basket on the table. You always did like talking with your mouth full, Harvey. A few men chuckled, but no one moved. Colton pushed his glass aside. You here to make threats? No, Elias said, voice calm. I'm here to tell the truth. Not for you, for everyone else listening. He turned to the room. When Maria got sick, we stopped paying Harvey because we had to choose between food and fire or debts. We made the choice most would have made. But I should have spoken up instead of hiding. That's on me. But I'll be damned if I let my wife's name rot, because a bitter man needs to feel powerful. Colton rose slowly. You calling me a liar, I'm calling you petty, Elias said. And I'm done letting you twist silence into proof. The room was still. Then Mabel's voice rang from the doorway. Took you long enough, Ward. A few more people nodded. Some murmured agreement. Colton scowled but said nothing. Elias left the basket on the table and turned to go. Outside, Naomi waited under the awning of the post office. You say what needed saying, she asked. He exhaled. Yeah. You okay? He looked at her. No. But I will be. They walked home in the dark, side by side, the moon low and pale behind shifting clouds. The next morning, a crate appeared on the cabin porch. Inside was a bundle of seed packets, a worn book on gardening, and a note from Mabel. Heard you're planting things. Figure you'll need more than potatoes. Naomi laughed, holding up the seeds. Looks like the town forgives fast when you feed 'em. Elias watched her face light up the morning sun, brushing her cheek like paint across canvas. We're not alone anymore, he said. She looked at him soft and sure. No, we're not. The ridge was waking up. Where once snow held tight to the trees, now wild violets crept along the edges of the stone path. The creek ran loud again, swollen from meltwater, humming the old songs of spring. The cabin smelled of fresh-cut wood and bread dough rising in the hearth, and Naomi's laughter could be heard through the open window. Elias stood at the edge of the garden, staring at the neat rows that now held shoots of green. He'd spent weeks here carving life into the soil. His boots were caked in mud, his back sore from bending and lifting, but the ache was good-earned. Naomi stepped onto the porch, sleeves rolled hair in a loose braid. She held 2 cups of coffee, steam curling into the morning air. You're up early, she said. Sun dragged me out. She passed him a cup, then leaned against the post. I saw your name scratched into the fence. He glanced over, the lips twitching. Jonas did that. With a heart next to it, she added. Not my doing, he said, but the warmth in his voice betrayed him. Naomi watched the ridge in silence. The wind played with her braid. You still thinking about moving into town? Elias shook his head. Not anymore. What changed? He turned to face her. I used to think healing meant starting over somewhere new. But it doesn't. Not really. It's about staying put and fixing what you broke. With your hands. With your time. She nodded slowly. If we're gonna build something real, it can't be on borrowed ground. Elias took her hand. Then let's call this ours. Naomi looked down at the garden, tiny shoots, crooked rows, nothing perfect. Good, she said. Ours doesn't have to be perfect. Later that week, they rode into town together with a wagon full of early spring onions and bundles of herbs Naomi had dried on the cabin shelves. The market had just reopened, and the main street buzzed with chatter and movement. Kids darted between stalls. The smell of bread and wet dirt filled the air. They set up beside Mabel's stable under a patched canvas Naomi had stitched herself. A chalkboard read, "Ridge Goods Grown with Grit." At first, only a few people approached, then a few more. Then a line. Caroline and Thomas arrived just before noon, Thomas leaning heavier than usual on his cane but his eyes shining with pride. Jonas waved from across the square, a crate of eggs under his arm and a ridiculous grin on his face. As the day went on, Naomi worked the crowd with ease. Her smile came easier now. Her voice was lighter. Elias noticed how people leaned in to listen, how they lingered just a little longer. At one point, Naomi caught him watching her and raised a brow. "What nothing," he said. "Just wondering how the hell I got so lucky." She shook her head, laughing. "You nearly froze me to death before we even kissed." "That's a hell of a love story." He grinned. Still turned out all right. That night, after the market had closed and the sun dipped low behind the town, Elias and Naomi walked the ridge trail in silence, the sound of their boots crunching softly in the dirt. The breeze carried the scent of pine and thawed earth. They stopped at the bluff where Mireya's ring now hung from a small iron hook embedded in the old fence post. Elias had placed it there a few days earlier quietly without fanfare. He hadn't told Naomi he was going to do it. He just did. Now she looked at it swaying gently in the wind. "I think she'd be proud of you," Naomi said. "I hope so." Naomi stepped closer. "Do you still talk to her in your head, I mean?" "Sometimes." "What do you say?" Elias exhaled. "I tell her I miss her. That the house is warmer now. That I stopped hiding." Naomi nodded, eyes glistening. "I think she'd like me." Elias smiled. "She would have told me to stop being a fool and kiss you already." Naomi leaned in. "Well, then you better listen to her." He did. By summer, the garden was full. Tomatoes climbed high on their stakes. Corn stretched tall and gold. Wildflowers bloomed along the border, just like Mireya had imagined years ago. Elias and Naomi worked the ridge like it was sacred, because in some ways it was. They hosted dinners on the porch with Carolyn's stew pot bubbling and music playing soft on a battered radio Jonas had traded for at the general store. People came. People stayed. Laughter lived there again. Naomi's old shack slowly became a seed house, a place for drying herbs, storing tools, and teaching kids from town how to cut seed potatoes. She carved her initials into the door alongside Elias's right, next to the faded W that Mireya had once marked. No one tried to replace the past. They just added to it. Late one evening, Elias stood under a sky so full of stars it looked alive. Naomi rested in a rocking chair behind him, humming softly, a blanket over her legs. He stared out at the land, his land, and saw it for the first time not as a graveyard of what was lost, but as a map of what had been fought for. This was never a story about coming back to what you had. It was about building something new from what was left. Naomi's voice drifted softly. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been if Mireya hadn't gotten sick?" He thought about it, then shook his head. "No, because I'd miss this one." She smiled into the dark. "Good answer." He turned, stepped over, and knelt beside her. His hand reached for hers, fingers folding together the way they always had since that long winter storm. "I never told you," he said quietly, "but the night I found you in the snow, I didn't just think I might lose you. I thought if I did, I'd stop existing altogether." Naomi's eyes met his. "You didn't lose me," she whispered. "You found me." And that was it. No grand ending. No fireworks. Just two people quiet and whole under a mountain sky, with dirt under their nails and the past behind them. And in the stillness of that summer night, it was enough. Because love like land is not about how it begins. It's about what you grow when no one's watching, when the storm is over, when you stay.